Welcome everyone to another episode of Revolution Recap. The Revolution left 2 more points on the table Saturday night as they battled to a 0-0 draw against a weakened RSL side. New England was the dominant team for much of the match, holding 60% possession and outshooting the visitors 23-9, but they failed to find the net, leaving them with a single point to take away from this game. I'm Greg Johnstone. Joining me today is Sean Donahue. Sean, how's it going?
You know, the weekend started off pretty poorly with the Spurs blowing a 1-0 lead against Leicester and VAR being a killer for them in that one. And then it ended with the Revolution having kind of a dull 0-0 draw against Salt Lake. So not my favorite soccer weekend.
And the Red Sox were eliminated from playoff contention this weekend. So really not a great weekend for New England sports. But on the bright side, we don't have to deal with Antonio Brown anymore. So, pros and cons, I guess, for this weekend. But let's get into this game. 0-0 draw, I think, for the remaining 4 games on the Revolution schedule. This was the clear game that, if the Revs wanted to take control of their playoff hopes, this was the game that you want to take 3 points. Luckily, some results went in their way. Chicago drew Cincinnati yesterday. I know Orlando lost. A few of the teams that are below the Revolution did not take advantage of the Revs only taking 1 point in this game, so it really might not hurt them in the long term, but certainly disappointing that the Revolution came out against a weakened Salt Lake side and still only came away with a draw. Sean, what was your key takeaway from this game?
Yeah, I know you make a great point. It was a very weakened Salt Lake team, and I was kind of disappointed that we didn't get to see some legends out there that are coming to the end of their career, and guys like Nick Raimondo and Kyle Beckerman. But it was a Salt Lake team that didn't look very good on paper, and the Revolution went into this game looking like they were going to be a team that would have the upper hand against Salt Lake. And yes, they had a lot of possession, but if you look at the first half before Gustavo Bou came on, the Revolution only managed 5 shots. There was 5-4 advantage in shots by the Revs. Salt Lake actually had 2 shots on target. The Revolution only had 1. The Revolution probably had the best chance of that half, but it was really the second half that the Revolution became more dominant with, I think, 18 shots on target, or 18 shots total in the second half, 2 on target, though. You mentioned Gustavo Bou. Everyone was expecting him to start this game, and then news came out that he picked up a knock last weekend that apparently nobody had heard about, which is another thing we can talk about. But this game just really showed how much the Revolution depend on Gustavo Bou at this point. I think there was a lack of urgency in the first half without him out there, and you almost wonder if the guys just knew he was going to come on in the second half, and as long as they kept it 0-0, he could kind of carry them. But there's a lot of talent on this Revolution team, attacking talent, and we've seen them be successful without Bou when Arena first took over, and it just seems like now they're extremely reliant on him. Salt Lake was kind of content to be sort of compact with the guys they were missing, and the Revolution really didn't do much to break them down. It's kind of sad when you're facing a team like Salt Lake, missing all those guys, and you only manage 5 shots in the half and just get 1 on target. Carles Gil had a fantastic shot that hit the crossbar, so credit for that, but that kind of was something out of nothing. They just weren't very creative in that first half, and Gustavo Bou came on and honestly didn't really look like he was hurt and played really well and contributed a lot of shots for the Revolution. And I think you were the one that pointed out that he actually led the team in shots in this game, despite only playing 45 minutes. But it just really showed that the Revolution kind of focused too much on him at this point. And there were 1 or 2 times in this game too where the ball got to Gustavo Bou and he was kind of in a tight spot at the top of the box and he opted to take a shot and actually hit the target, but he perhaps could have done a bit better if he passed it 1 more player wide where there was an open guy on the side of the box. So the offense just kind of runs through him at this point. At least the final shot kind of seems to run through him at this point. And in this game, when they were without him for 45 minutes, I don't think it was good enough.
Yeah, I agree. It was a bit of a tale of 2 halves between the Revs. The first half, they didn't seem to have any flow whatsoever. It seemed like the team really missed Gustavo Bou's presence in the first half. Carles Gil certainly created a couple chances and did a lot on his own, but you can see having another attacking playmaker out there really changes the dynamic of this offense. And we've talked about Juan Fernando Caicedo, and how I think he's a decent finisher. I think he's a decent supporting piece, but when he's out there, really the only thing he can do is finish chances, and there really wasn't a lot of service for him, so he was a bit of a useless player, whereas you bring in Gustavo Bou in the second half, and you're right, he had 6 shots yesterday, only 1 of them made him on target, but still, he certainly was a a great threat. And I thought Gustavo Bou had the game winner there in stoppage time, Sean, where Diego Fagundes starts the fast breakout, slides it to Heel down the right wing. He cuts it back to Gustavo Bou, and Bou kicks a 65-yard field goal that landed somewhere in Franklin, Mass. But I mean, Gustavo Bou, besides that botched shot aside in stoppage time, I thought he came out and that Revs offense looked significantly more on point. And, you have to think if Gustavo Bou played a full 90 minutes, the Revs take 3 points in this game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned that last sequence at the end. That was probably one of the more disappointing sequences of Gustavo Bou's Revolution career, if not the most disappointing, because it started off with him throwing the ball away. He took a quick throw and threw it right to Salt Lake and put the Revolution on the back foot. And then what was disappointing to me on that play, too, was that he kind of put his head down there and really didn't make any effort to go chase down the ball. But then it almost worked out for him because he was left in an offensive position when the Revolution did manage to get a quick turnover and get the counterattack. But then he got put in a great position to have a great shot on target and just completely whiffed at it. So not one for the highlight reel for Gustavo Bou, but it's unquestionably he changed the game when he came on. Just looking at other stats too, the Revolution only attempted 7 take-ons in the first half, which is them trying to beat a defender. In the second half, they attempted 20. So you really can tell they seemed a lot more ambitious in the second half, a lot more willing to try things, and put a lot more pressure on and showed more urgency. But they needed to have that urgency from the beginning of the game, and this was one of those games that looked like a must-win going into the game. As it turns out, the other results throughout the league really meant it wasn't a must-win, and pretty much every result went the Revolution's way last night, so that helped them out. But for a game of such importance and a stretch where the Revolution really haven't been playing that well and haven't been getting the results that they need, it was kind of surprising to me that it took till Gustavo Bou came on to see the urgency that they should have had since the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And to be fair to RSL's defense, they seem to come out and play for a draw. They seem to want to frustrate the Revs at every opportunity. They didn't seem to have much of an interest in scoring. Salt Lake only had 2 shots on target, both of them from Kellen Rowe, both of them a bit from distance. So really not a whole lot of chances, good scoring chances from RSL. I don't know what the expected goals difference is going to be, but I'm sure Real Salt Lake is going to be below 1. It didn't seem like a game they had much interest in finding the back of the net. So, a really tough pill to swallow for the Revs because the results didn't go their way. I feel like the Revs for the past month or 6 weeks have been getting results that have been good enough to get them by, and it might be good enough to get them into the playoffs. But if Gustavo Bou is able to convert that shot there in stoppage time, we're talking about the Revs basically clinching a playoff spot this morning, as opposed to looking at the schedule and trying to figure out where they're going to scrape up 3 or 4 points to get into the playoffs. So a huge chance missed, and you have to wonder. I didn't hear really what the injury was from Gustavo Bou. I know that Jeff Lemieux said that he trained once this week, and it was a partial training. There were some people online that said Gustavo Bou didn't look like he went through all of his warm-ups. There obviously something is wrong with Gustavo Bou, but he came in the second half, which was ahead of schedule. I know they said on the Revolution broadcast last night that the plan was for him to come in the 65th minute, and they ended up putting him in the second half because they desperately needed him on there. He looked perfectly fine, and Bruce Arena says that he'll be ready to go against Portland. So I'm not sure what the injury was. It seems to be a little unclear. He was not on the injury report, but it's a pretty significant absence from that starting lineup, and that might change the course of the Revs season.
Can we just talk about how useless injury reports have been this season? How many times have there been nobody on the injury report, and then 2 or 3 guys were, for whatever reason, had some knock that, in this case, apparently they knew about as far away as last weekend. So, what is the point of the injury report at this point, at this juncture? Because it's just completely useless.
Well, and I get teams don't want to disclose injuries because it probably is kind of like a Bill Belichickian thing where you don't want other teams to know about injuries and give them more information on how to prep for you. But with that being said, I don't understand why you can't list players as questionable. It's not necessarily in or out or doubtful or whatever. You could put someone questionable with a minor injury, which is what this sounded like. So I'm not totally sure. Yeah, injury reports, I don't know why I mean, we don't use them for information, Sean. I think that we get most of our injury information from Jeff Lemieux on Twitter. But even still, I mean, we heard nothing about Gustavo Bou's injury at all until game time, and that lineup came out. Even before lineups came out, you'd think that they would drop a bit of a, piece of information a little bit before, so fans are a little bit braced and don't have a complete heart attack when they see Gustavo Bou sitting on the bench. But and you also have to wonder too, with the midweek match, did they want to rest him? Did they not want to push him too hard? I don't know if I buy into that theory completely, because I think this is the game you needed 3 points from. I think this is the more likely game where you're going to win, as opposed to at Portland, which is a cross country match. It's midweek. You're going to have tired legs. I don't think that game is as solid of a win as this one would have been, especially after seeing Real Salt Lake's lineup. So I don't know if I buy into the theory that Gustavo Bou was being rested. I think that if he was good enough to play 45 minutes, and if this was a minor injury, I don't know. I think he should have been in there, but who knows? We a lot of details unknown, and we'll see if it pops up again. It'll be something interesting to watch the rest of the season. It seems to be pretty private, so I don't know. I want to get to my takeaway, which is actually I'm going to give some credit to the defensive midfield last night. Wilfried Zahibo, I thought, had a arguably man of the match performance yesterday. I know we've talked about him really improving since Bruce Arena came in charge. Last night he had 5 shots, only 1 was on target, 3 were blocked, but he was 49 for 58 passing. That's good enough. That's 84.5%. He was also 13 for 16 for passes into the attacking third. He had 2 chances created, 6 ball recoveries, 3 for 4 on aerial duels, 2 tackles, 1 clearance, and he created one of the better chances in the first half, which was a long ball over the top to Christian Pinilla, which Pinilla scuffs the shot, misses pretty poorly wide, but it was a really nice long ball over the top that made something out of nothing too. Luis Caicedo too had a great night. Stats aren't as impressive. 1 shot off target, 39 for 47 passing, 83%. 2 for 5 in the attacking third. He really wasn't a factor into the Revs offense, but 4 ball recoveries, 2 tackles, 1 clearance, and he did a really good job, I thought, filling in for Brandon Bai and DeJuan Jones when they pushed up. He did a great job kind of catching up and shutting down some counterattacks on the wings. I think the defensive midfield really came up big yesterday, and they don't get a lot of credit, but Zahibo and Caicedo has turned into a very stable pairing, and for a position that I think a lot of fans wanted to see an upgrade in the middle of the season, both of them have stepped up throughout the year, and again, I mean, RSL didn't have a whole lot of chances. They weren't really pushing a lot of people forward, but when they did, Zahibo and Caicedo seemed to squash any opportunities. So they get positive marks from me from yesterday.
Yeah, I agree, and we've probably been some of the bigger critics of MLS All-Star Wilfried Zahibo and his play over the years for the Revolution, but he really has kind of changed the type of player he's been under Bruce Arena. I don't know if the instructions from Arena have been better or what, but he's been looking a lot better, and I agree, there is a case for him to be man of the match for how he played last night. The only thing I will say about Luis Caicedo is I thought he had a fantastic game, but there was one play that could have made that fantastic game be a LVP type of game had he actually connected with Corey Bard on that play where Bard kind of blew past him and he couldn't catch up, and it looked like he stumbled and went down and tried to grab Corey Bard and drag him down from behind in what almost certainly would have been a red card. And had he succeeded in what he was trying to do, the Revolution probably would have gone on to lose the game rather than even get the draw. So, his game I thought overall was very, very good, but that one play there could have been boneheaded enough to cost the team the game. So that was kind of surprising to see. He is a young guy, but he's got to have better awareness than that in that situation, especially because De La Mea was also kind of there to help out, and De La Mea eventually did kind of stop that chance from turning into anything too significant. But it's hard for me to ignore that one particular play from Luis Caicedo, who's been fantastic all season. But you'd like to see a bit better soccer intelligence and soccer awareness in a situation like that, especially in a season where the Revolution have had quite a few costly red cards.
And quite a few costly non-red cards that turned into red cards. I would
True.
say. VAR never seems to give us the benefit of the doubt. So anything that is borderline, I think a lot of us are bracing for the worst case scenario. So a few other players that I don't necessarily think we need to get into, but I think deserve some credit. De La Mea had another great game. Seven aerials won yesterday. He had 94% pass accuracy. So he had a bit of a quiet night too in the defense, but he was pretty solid. And in a game where I think they weren't really passing in the back very well, Brandon Bye and Dwan Jones had some issues with pass accuracy, but Andrew Farrell and De La Mea more specifically had a pretty solid game in ball control and distributing the ball out of the back, especially in the second half. Matt Turner, I also got to give him credit. Clean sheet, 4th of the season for him, only the 9th of his career. It seems like he has a lot more, but only 2 shots on target, both of them from Kellen Rowe. There was another play where Sam Johnson, Andrew Farrell seems to fall down. Sam Johnson is alone on goal, and Turner kind of cuts down on the angle, so he does not get credit for a save there, but Turner handled that one pretty well. So have to give Matt Turner a little bit of credit too for keeping RSL out of the back of the net. Outside of that, pretty lackluster performances from the Revs offense. 23 shots from New England yesterday. 10 of them were blocked, so you got to give some credit to RSL. But still, of the 13 remaining shots, 2 were on target. You have to give a little bit of credit for Carly Esquiel and Brandon Bye for hitting the post on, but still a bit of a lacking that final finish, and it really kind of cost the Revolution yesterday. So we've already kind of gone into that and the struggles for the Revs offense, but worth noting that they we've kind of been back and forth over whether or not the Revs offense is, if their finishing is strong or if their finishing is weak, and it seems like their Jekyll and Hyde performances continue as they only find 3 shots on target yesterday. Sean, I want to kind of get into the substitution pattern, though. Obviously, Gustavo Bou came on for Juan Fernando Caicedo yesterday at halftime, but we did get a question about Juan Agudelo coming in for Luis Caicedo in the, I want to say, around the 65th minute or the 60th minute. Mike Kennedy asked us if the Revs should have stuck with Luis Caicedo longer or was bringing in Agudelo the right move. I just praised Luis Caicedo for his game, but I also mentioned he wasn't really making much of an impact in the final third. So, Sean, do you think Bruce Arena made the correct decision bringing in Juan Agudelo at that point in the game?
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan either of Agudelo coming in as a substitution for Luis Caicedo there. I haven't been particularly impressed with Juan Agudelo overall this season. He's had his moments, but it just seems like to me that he doesn't add enough offensively to justify what you're perhaps giving up defensively there. And as it turned out, the Revolution didn't give up too many chances defensively after Agudelo came on. But at the time, I wasn't a huge fan of the substitution. I think Caicedo just covers so much more ground than Juan Agudelo. Agudelo did end up with 2 key passes, so he did add to the offense. He added more to the offense than, say, Diego Fagundez did when he came on. But I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of that sub at that point of the game, especially given the overall game that Luis Caicedo was having. I would have liked to see Diego Fagundez come on for Christian Pinilla sooner than he did, because I didn't think Pinilla was having a particularly good game. You mentioned that chance he got early from Zihibo that he scuffed. He had a couple other chances that I thought he should have done better with in this one. So I kind of would have liked to see Diego Fagundez come on earlier. With that said, Fagundez, I thought, when we're talking about substitutions, didn't do enough when he came on. Kind of had the opportunity to help change the game and didn't get involved as much as he would have liked to have seen.
Yeah, he had that interception in stoppage time, which he led that counterattack. But outside of that, I don't know what else Diego Fagundez really did yesterday. But in terms of Christian Pinilla, I thought he started out really strong. He doesn't seem to be a 90-minute player anymore for the Revolution. He did have that really nice low cross that Teal Bunbury was not able to finish. He was at a bit of a tough angle. But Christian Pinilla had a couple really nice moments in the first half, and I think he still should be starting, or at least should be coming in as a super sub. I still think he has a role on this team, but is he a consistent player for 90 minutes? No, he really isn't, and it's very frustrating to see this guy who clearly has a lot of skill, but he's not able to put it together for a long period of time. But
I think the biggest disappointment with him has been, over the past 2 games anyways, the finishing, because he's getting himself in good positions and he's making good runs, but his final shot, and albeit he had that great chip the previous game, but his final shot, other than that, has kind of been a letdown on what have been easier chances than certainly that one was.
Yeah, three shots, none on target for Christian Pinilla yesterday. So there's some good, there is some bad. He did have 84.4% passing accuracy, according to Who Scored. So, good, some bad from Christian Pinilla, which has kind of been the story for him for the season. But anyway, let's get back to Juan Agudelo. He was 10 for 13 on passing, 8 for 10 in the attacking third. He did have 2 key passes, as you said, Sean. Did have 2 ball recoveries. And as you said, 2 chances created, 1 tackle, 1 block. This is the substitution that was made was a offensive player for a defensive player. And when you're going for 3 points, I think that's a roll of the dice that Bruce Arena is going to take 10 times out of 10. And I get the logic behind it. I don't think Luis Caicedo is going to add a whole lot to the offense. 25 minutes left. 25 minutes left. Caicedo came out in the 65th minute. So it's a bit of a desperation move. And we've seen that, I think that exact same substitution, go against the Revs. I think it was the Toronto game where that exact same sub came in, and the Revs got exploited on the counterattack. But yesterday, a weakened RSL lineup really didn't have much of a counterattack to muster. I know there were a few players that kind of pushed forward, but even in the closing minutes, I think there was one time yesterday where I forget who it was on Real Salt Lake, but DeJuan Jones was pretty much guarding him alone in the box. Farrell was kind of helping Brandon Vai out on the right flank, and De La Mea was kind of covering someone else somewhere in the box, and DeJuan Jones had someone who was much taller than him, just kind of standing alone in the box, and I thought it would have been a great chance for RSL to swing across in, but RSL seemed more concerned about holding possession and killing the clock. So I think in hindsight, that sub didn't really harm them at all. If it was a better team like Atlanta or New York City FC or LAFC, I could see a counterattack really going
Salt Lake
against
with
them.
their starters.
Or Salt Lake with their starters. I could see them punching home a goal. I think you actually tweeted that yesterday. This seemed like a game that RSL puts in, one player that can really, change the counterattack for that team and get that goal for RSL. But RSL never really seemed to have any interest in doing that. They were happy with the point. So, hindsight's 2020. I think Juan Agudelo was the correct move. And honestly, you could argue that he should have been in there sooner, now that you know the end result. But at the time, I was a little hesitant too, seeing Juan Agudelo come in for Caicedo, because I don't think he is as solid defensively as a lot of people think. I have the same reservations of that move. Actually the sub that I thought was a bit interesting was Gustavo Bou coming in for Juan Caicedo. Not necessarily because Bou didn't need to come into that game, but Teal Bunbury pushing up to striker. We go back and forth on Teal Bunbury too, like every Revs fan. I was a little surprised to see Teal stay in the game as opposed to Juan Fernando Caicedo, who, the last time we saw him score was at New York City FC. He can make something out of nothing. If he gets some good service, he's going to finish his chances, whereas Teal Bunbury is hot and cold, and right now he seems to be a little bit cold. Do you think keeping in Teal was the correct choice, Sean?
Yeah, I go back and forth on that move as well. The one thing I will say is I noticed pretty much from the opening kickoff, Teal Bunbury's hold-up play actually was kind of effective in this game. There was a play really shortly into the game where it was a long ball forward, and he laid it off to, I forget who it was, but it kind of led to a decent Revolution attacking pressure. Juan Caicedo, I don't think was as involved as you would have liked to have seen him in this one. In 45 minutes, he didn't get off a single shot. But he's a better finisher than Teal Bunbury. There's no question about it. And in a game where the Revolution only got 3 shots on target, they could have used that. He was a guy that would have been kind of nice to have on the bench to bring on as a sub, maybe in the 60th minute or something to add more to the attack. So it was unfortunate that the Revolution got themselves in that position where they needed a goal late, and really bringing on Gustavo Bou for Juan Fernando Caicedo isn't an offensive sub. It's at best kind of a neutral sub because Gustavo Bou generally plays a little bit further back than Juan Caicedo. He is a more dangerous player, but it's not really adding a more offensive player on for a defensive guy. So I kind of agree it was an interesting choice. But I do think Teal Bunbury had the better game up until that point, so I kind of get it. It was another one of those games though where when it got late, you almost wish you had a guy like Brian Wright on the bench that you could have brought on, who I think also scored a goal this weekend at Birmingham.
Yeah, I think he's up to 5 or 6 goals now in Birmingham. He's been hot lately, and he's making an argument that the Revs should hang on to him for a little bit. Having Brian Wright down at USL, kind of showing what he's got, I think that's been a pleasant surprise. And I'm not really sure what the Revolution are going to do with him at the end of the season. It's going to be very interesting. He's certainly making a case that he might be a productive player at MLS, but we'll see what happens with Brian Wright. We did get another question, though, from Mike Kennedy. He asked, would Bou have been more threatening in Bunbury's role tonight? I know Bunbury moved from the wing to up at striker, but do you think Gustavo Bou should have gotten more time at striker, or do you think he needs to stay in kind of that roaming, attacking midfield position?
I still kind of like him in that roaming position. I think he's got a great ability to just kind of take people on one-on-one and kind of create chances on his own to some extent when he gets the ball with facing goal. I think he probably works better than as a striker up there. We have seen him score, I think, one headed goal for the Revolution, but he's not much of a target overall. He's more of a guy that takes shots on the ground and with his feet, and is great at making that one dribble to get by somebody and create a shot. And I think if you put him up in Teal Bunbury's role, you're kind of losing a bit of his best talents up there. So I don't think I agree that he'd be better off in Teal Bunbury's role, but. And he, I thought he was pretty effective in this game overall. Just a couple of shots that maybe should have been better, especially that late one that we mentioned. But I think his best role is probably more of a slightly more withdrawn and more of a roaming role where he can have the freedom to kind of take guys on.
Yeah, and I think the Revs are lacking that kind of second option in the midfield when, if you move Bou up to the striker position, I think Carles Gil, is in need a little bit of help in terms of ball control and possession, and Bou and Gil, really work well together in advancing the ball up. Whereas I think if you move Bou to be kind of the target man up top, who kind of makes runs behind the defense, I think Gil is going to draw more attention and be a little less effective. Whereas when Bou is there, it causes the defense nightmares all over the place. So. One more note about Teal Bunbury. We talked about how hot he was earlier in the summer and how he couldn't stop scoring. Teal Bunbury is now 8 appearances without a goal. Now, one of those appearances was last week at Orlando City when he got 5 minutes. Then, of course, there was the 12-minute appearance against the Chicago Fire. But the rest of them, 90 minutes, 73 minutes, 90 minutes, 90 minutes, 72 minutes, 90 minutes. So that's 6 starts or games where he's played the majority that he has been unable to find the net, which is not something you like to see out of Teal Bunbury. He is very streaky, and right now he's on a bit of a cold streak. So, Sean, before we get into listener questions, one other thing I want to point out to our listeners is just the Revs situation. We kind of alluded to it at the beginning about some results going the Revolution's way and this game not being as damaging as we thought it would when the final whistle blew. The Revs are now 4 points away from clinching a playoff spot. They have 3 games left at Portland, home versus New York City FC, at Atlanta. Chicago is most likely to catch them. I would say they have 2 games left, home versus Toronto at FC and at Orlando. Montreal has 2 games also. They are at Atlanta, which I think we can chalk up to be a loss, but we'll see. And then home versus New York Red Bulls. They also play in the second leg of the Canadian Championship against TFC, so they might not even have a fully rested lineup next week against Atlanta. And then Orlando, who is a bit of a long shot, at Cincinnati, and home versus Chicago. So the Revs need 4 points to clinch over Chicago, 3 over Montreal, and 2 to knock out Orlando. Sean, how are you feeling about the Revs' playoffs hopes right now? They seem to be lined up for that 7th spot, but with a tough schedule up ahead, I think a lot of fans are nervous. How would you rate their chances right now?
Yeah, I mean, they got really lucky this weekend because there was a time where Orlando was ahead of Houston for, I think, the majority of that game. And that would have really changed things if Orlando had won that game. And Chicago against Cincinnati, that was a game that you would have thought Chicago could have done better in, but Chicago managed a total of 1 shot on target in that one. So speaking of teams that kind of disappointed, if they had won that game, then it would be a whole other ball game. I still think, like you said, Chicago is probably the team that has the best chance of catching the Revolution. I think the Revolution are in a position where they probably are going to need to win one of their last 3 games to make the playoffs. And I'm not sure their schedule is that easy. In which any of those games look very winnable. Montreal played this last weekend. Montreal has lost 3 straight games, so that tells you where Montreal could be had they been playing a bit better. They lost to Cincinnati, last weekend. Had they won that game, they'd be putting a lot more pressure on the Revolution. And then they lost to the Galaxy this weekend, 2-1, in a game in which Montreal left really all of their best players at home. So it seems like they're taking the Canadian Championship more seriously than MLS, and I'm almost kind of given up on playoff play. So with that in mind, it really is just Chicago that, in my mind, that's a threat to the Revolution. And Chicago plays home versus Toronto, which is a tough game, but any home game I see as potentially winnable. And Toronto has been up and down this season, so potentially they win that game. And then they're on the road at Orlando, who by week 34 could very well have been mathematically eliminated, depending on how results go. So there's a potential that Chicago could win both those games, and if they do, the Revolution could be in some trouble, because the Revolution, given their poor goal differential and that being the tiebreaker, that would come into play with the Fire, because in any situation in which they were tied on points, they'd have to be tied on wins as well. There is some concern there. So if the Revolution go into Portland and lose, which is a very real possibility, then I'm not that confident in the Revolution's playoff chances. I still think that they're more likely than not to make the playoffs, but and very much thanks to the results this weekend. But I don't think it's by any means an assured thing unless the Revolution can find a way to win at least one of these last 3 games. And it just seems like a kind of a tough schedule for the Revolution to even get one win.
Yeah, they need one win to really push them over the edge. And again, this weekend against RSL would have been the game to do it. And I think after they dominated this game and seemed to be the team that was on the front foot, not coming away with, even with the results kind of going the Revolution's way, it looks like a game that's going to come back to bite them in the end. And honestly, it shows that this team is, going into the playoffs, you lose a little bit of confidence knowing that you're going to have to go on the road and play a much stronger team than the team that was there in Foxborough last night. And yeah, you just worry if this is a team that's able to close the door and come through when they need to. So, but anyway, let's get to some listener questions. And on this topic, Revolution Report asks us, what is the most winnable game of the last 3? Sean, of these remaining 3 games, which one is the most likely to get the Revs the 3 points that they need?
I know Providence. Portland has been struggling at Providence Park in their last few games, but I think on short rest going into Portland, that game doesn't strike me as very winnable. I have to go with the home game against New York City FC, which also seems like a very difficult match. But again, any game at home on the Gillette Stadium turf, you have to give the Revolution a good shot at winning. So just by nature of that being a home game, I think that would be the one I would see as the most winnable. At Atlanta, if Joseph Martinez is out for that game, I still don't really see that one as very winnable. Maybe a draw is the best result, and maybe the Revolution going to that game needing a draw. But I would have to say the New York City FC game for the sole reason that it's a home game for the Revolution. But all 3 of those games look like games that could be points dropped for the Revolution, and I don't think the Revolution go into any of them as favorites, even at home against New York City FC.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's kind of a downer to finish the season at Atlanta. It's going to be interesting to see if they need a win at Atlanta and how aggressive they play it, because that could get really ugly really fast. The Revs don't have a really good history going down there and playing in the Mercedes-Benz Dome or whatever it's called down there. I agree. I think the home game against New York City FC, it's a rival. You know them pretty well. I think that is the most winnable of the remaining 3. Midweek game on the West Coast really doesn't strike me as a great option to win. Now, with that being said, Portland's also on low rest, and for whatever reason, the Revs seem to come out and play really well on the West Coast. But I think, Teal Bunbury did an interview with the Far Post podcast a few months ago, and he said, if we win our home games, we're in the playoffs. And I think that's just the emphasis that the Revs have, that, when teams come into Foxborough, they're going to be the better team, and they're going to try to win the game. And I think that's the game. I think they might be a little more conservative and play for a point at Portland. Maybe not play for a point, I should say, but I could see their game plan being a lot more aggressive home against New York City FC as opposed to going on the road, cross country with some tired legs. That might be a game where they're not happy taking a point, but they will settle for a point, whereas I don't see them holding back anything against New York City FC. I think that if it's a 1-1 game or a 2-2 game in the 80th minute, the Revs are going to push everyone forward trying to find that goal, and hopefully they get lucky. So I would say that if there's a win, I think it's next week at home against New York City FC.
Yeah, all the Revs need is a win and a draw to guarantee them a spot in the playoffs. So if they were to go into Portland and get a draw, I think that would be a good result. But it would still mean they need to win one of their last 2 games. But to me, going into Portland, if you end up grinding out a 0-0 result, don't think that's realistic. I don't think the Revolution are built to play games like that. But if you go in there and get a draw one way or another, to me that would be a good result for the Revolution. I do think there's a realistic possibility that Chicago could win their last 2 games, in which case 4 points would be a must for the Revolution. So any result in Portland, in my mind, is a good thing for the Revolution. But they've put themselves in a position where they really might need to win that game at home against New York City FC, where a draw might not be enough, because you really don't want to be in a position where you have to get 3 points out of Atlanta.
And TFC will be playing in the Canadian Championship against Montreal, so they might have tired legs going to Chicago. And then by the time Chicago goes to Orlando might be knocked out as well. So very good chance that Orlando might be playing some second-team guys, might not be taking that as seriously as possible. So, yeah, Chicago is a much better threat. I would say the Revs are still in the driver's seat, but yeah, you have to be a little bit concerned with how the schedule is shaken out. Revolution Report also asks us, looking ahead to a potential playoff game, would you rather play Philadelphia or would you play Atlanta United minus Joseph Martinez?
Yeah, that's a tough one for me. I'd been, last week I think I got asked this question before without the Joseph Martinez injury taking place. And Philadelphia to me then was the clear choice. I still think it's easier to play in Philadelphia, but with that said, Atlanta United hasn't been as good this year as they have been in the past. They've still been a fantastic team and recovered after kind of a poor start to the season. But if given the opportunity to play at Philadelphia or at Atlanta with Joseph Martinez out, even though Atlanta is a very, very difficult place to play, I think the Revolution might be better off going to Atlanta, just given that they haven't been as good of a team this year, and then losing Joseph Martinez, the best striker in the league, going into that match is going to be devastating for them. And the Revolution will have just finished the season playing at Atlanta, so they shouldn't be too intimidated by the crowd because they will have experienced it just the week before. So I'm revising my pick now that Joseph Martinez is out and saying Atlanta, but I think either of those games would be very difficult for the Revolution.
I'd hope they'd play against Philadelphia so I could go to the game. That's what I say.
I mean, I hope they play against Philadelphia. I'm with you on that one.
Would you make the road trip down? We'll have to do live coverage from Talon Energy Stadium, from lovely Chester, Pennsylvania.
No, I would definitely like to go to that game. So for selfish reasons, I think Philadelphia would be the matchup I'd like to see.
With that being said, though, Philadelphia is no slouch. I mean, they are a very, very solid young team, and I think a lot of players or a lot of pundits and casual MLS fans just kind of know Philadelphia as kind of a team that in previous years have kind of bounced around kind of the bottom of the playoff picture in the Eastern Conference standing, and they don't come across as a juggernaut like NYCFC Atlanta, but that's a very tough game for the Revolution to go into at Philadelphia. They're very good and they're very young. I mean, that's a tough team, and I don't think this is as easy a question as you think. I think Atlanta might be the better matchup, but I don't know. I don't like their odds in either one of them, if I'm being totally upfront about it. So,
yeah, and in Philly's last 2 games, a draw against LAFC, the best team in the league, and a 3-1 victory over Atlanta. So, kind of tells you that Philadelphia is for real with getting results like that.
Absolutely. Gustavo Bou is the best striker on Discord. Asked us why couldn't Bou start the game. He played the entire second half, so it couldn't have been an injury. If Bruce thought this game was a must-win, like he said, why not start Bou? So this is a bit of a... Oh, and he also says, why not rest Bou at Portland after taking 3 points at home if you start Gustavo Bou? So this kind of echoes something I said earlier. I think this is the truth that Gustavo Bou was limited in training and might not have been fully 90 minutes fit, because I think the best strategy if you want to rest Bou and limit his minutes would have been to start him tonight and rest him in the midweek match. So I think he was playing with a minor injury. I don't know if it was a strain. I'm not sure what it was. It didn't seem to affect him. But Bruce Arena says he is fully fit for the Portland game. I'm not sure if I totally believe it, but if he does play 90 minutes on Portland. In Portland, there's some questions that I think went unanswered on what exactly happened here, because he was certainly missed in the first half. Jared Michaud asks us, how bad is VAR against the Revs? Some fans kind of took some issue yesterday with some borderline calls. I think I'll call them borderline calls. One was a handball where there was a shot that came in. It bounced off. It looks like it bounced off of the arm of an RSL player, although his arm was kind of tucked in towards his body. And then Paul Mariner said on the Revs broadcast that he did not think it was a handball whatsoever. Some people also took offense to towards the end. There was a ball kind of in the box. The goalkeeper came out and kind of clipped Teal Bunbury. Teal Bunbury kind of passed the ball back, and then there was a bit of a collision, and Bunbury went down in the box. Some people thought that should have been a penalty call. Neither one went to VAR, so I think a lot of people were a little upset. But, Sean, I didn't think either one of those calls were egregious or clear and obvious errors, so I didn't have any issue with the referees not going to VAR. Of the times the Revolution have gotten screwed by VAR, I did not consider this one of them. What were your thoughts on those calls? I know we don't have our refereeing expert Jake here, but what were your thoughts on those calls? And do you think the Revs have a legitimate gripe to be angry at VAR today?
Yeah, I know both plays you're talking about, and the handball play was not a handball. You can't call that a handball. If that goes against the Revolution, I think Rev fans are rightly up in arms. That the guy's arms are in a natural position. He's not moving it to make himself bigger and block the shot and blocked the cross, and that was absolutely the right call and didn't need to go to VAR. The Teal Bunbury play, I honestly didn't see an angle that would have said was a clear and obvious error. Maybe they did have that angle and should have gone to VAR. At first glance, it did look like it was potentially a foul, but it's one of those plays that frequently doesn't get called. There have been plenty of times this season where VAR has gone against the Revs. There's been plenty of times this season where VAR has helped the Revs. This isn't a game you can blame VAR on. Even if that's maybe should have been a penalty kick late, the fact that you're leaving it to stoppage time and haven't really had that many good chances on frame, it's hard for me to blame VAR for this loss for the Revolution. And I would say this is one of the least controversial games in that sense.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I think this isn't neither one of them. I don't blame them for not going to VAR or being called. So I think this is a game that a result we can't blame on the referees. I'll put it that way. One of the few times I can say it this year. But CMoney008 on Discord also asks us, can Carles Gil get back to his goal-scoring ways after being stuck on 9 for a long time? He has been stuck on 9 for a long time. He's trying to get into that 10-goal, 10-assist club, which is a more rare feat than I think a lot of people realize. Carles Gil obviously had that chance in the first half where he had that long shot that clipped off the top of the bar. So another game where he's unable to find that 10th goal. Sean, do you think Carles Gil hits that 10-goal mark sometime in these last 3 games?
I mean, I think he's had to focus less on being the goal-scoring threat for the Revolution since they've gotten Gustavo Bou. He only had 2 shots in this game. But, I do think the Revolution kind of need that from him. I think they need him to be more of a goal-scoring threat. With 3 games left, I expect him to find a way to get to 10 goals. But, as you saw in the first half, he was almost one of the guys that took a little bit more ambition with Gustavo Bou out there and, attempted that shot off the crossbar. And, it seems when Bou's out there, he's frequently looking to just find him and give Bou the opportunity to get a shot and, looks to him a lot. But I agree that you kind of need more of a goal-scoring threat out of him that we saw earlier in the season to be more of a danger than just having Bou out there trying to take all the shots.
Jason Schmidt asks us, is there a world where Kellen Rowe plays for the Revs again?
I mean, I don't think so. It's Bruce Arena now. Mike Burns is gone. Brad Friedel's gone. So I wouldn't say never, given those changes. But, even with the poor season that Kellen Rowe has had, it still seems to me like he's going to be a free agent this offseason. Unless, he plays really well with RSL and RSL convinces him to come back and, they give him a really good contract. I have trouble seeing him going anywhere other than Seattle, even if he has to take a little bit less money to go there. It just seems kind of destined that he ends up back at his hometown team in free agency. And I'm not sure why he would come back to New England. He had a good, reputation with the fans here, but, with how things played out and how he left, it just doesn't seem too likely that he'd be back here given the stage of the career he's in and given, he probably has an opportunity to go to his hometown team at this point.
Rennie Swan asks us, bigger need for the Revs, striker or center back? Sean, what's top of the list for the Revs this offseason?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think I lean towards striker at this point. I think they need both. And I think if they go through the offseason without signing both and also without signing fullback help, then help, then they haven't done a good job. I expect them to address all three of those areas as well as potentially another central midfielder. But if you were to ask me based on what we've seen in the past few games, I'd say finding a really strong number 9 might be more important even than a center back. And you definitely saw it in this game. And I think it's been the issue the past few games is they haven't had that guy to kind of feed off of in the number 9 role where Bou and Carles Gil can kind of lay off and that person can be the hold-up guy up top. Bunbury does it sometimes, but finding someone that can do it consistently well could be a game changer for this team's offense.
Yeah, I agree. And I know Juan Fernando Caicedo is going to be gone at the end of the season. I can't imagine the Revs using their purchase option on a guy that doesn't play 90 minutes and giving him $500,000 in salary. So I mean that kind of leaves you with Teal Bunbury up top, which again he's very streaky. He has some pros, he has some cons. Brian Wright we talked about earlier. I'm not sure if they want to make him a full-time starter. I don't think they will. I think if anything, Brian Wright will fill into the Juan Fernando Caicedo role next year if they decide to keep him. There's still a very good chance they don't keep him. After that, who else do the Revs have at striker? I guess Renix could play up there. I guess they could put some trust into their young guys. But ultimately, I think if you're going into this next season, the 2020 season, with Teal Bunbury as your starting striker, I think that's going to cause some issues. I think you need someone better up there to finish chances. And I don't think Bou is going to be moving up to striker for the reasons we mentioned earlier. So I think a striker is a bit more of a glaring need. Center back, you have Tony De La Mea, you have Jalil Anibaba, you have Andrew Farrell. Those guys aren't a solid center back pairing. Those guys aren't the most intimidating defense, in MLS, but they're serviceable, and I think we've seen them show their value this season, that even though they're not the most talented players, I'll say, they've been able to kind of rotate in and out and get the team through the season. And I know Matt Turner kind of makes up for a few errors here and there. Certainly he's had a wonderful season. I think a center back would really do wonders in terms of solidifying that back line and really preventing more goals from going in. But I think right now you need someone to finish chances, because as we saw yesterday, Gustavo Bou leaves the lineup or Carles Gil leaves the lineup. This team is a little bit lost, so I think they need another offensive player, which is a bit of a change from what we've said in the past, but I think this offseason they need another forward. Let's go into some final thoughts. Do you have... Oh, well, actually, I do have one question, because a few people mentioned on Twitter that Defender of the Year voting has started this week, and some people have revealed their ballots. I think I know the answer to this question. I don't know if we've talked about it or if I just know you really well. I know where you're going to go with this, but do you have any input on who the media members should vote for Defender of the Year?
I mean, you can no longer vote for the goalkeeper, so I don't think it's a contest. I think it has to be Andrew Farrell. He's the only guy that's played regularly all season and played, at least decently well all season. De La Mea, I'm not sure has played enough minutes. I think he's been decent, but I don't think he's played enough minutes to really overtake Farrell. I don't think Mancian hasn't been good enough. Anibaba hasn't played enough. Edgar Castillo, I don't think has been good enough. Brandon Bai, certainly, I don't think has been good enough. So to me, there's only one answer, and it's Andrew Farrell, and I'm not really sure how an argument can be made for anyone else.
Yeah, and just to kind of roll through games played, Bai has played 27, Farrell has played 26, then DeJuan Jones and Edgar Castillo had both made 20 appearances, although Jones has played some right wing and he's kind of played up a little bit, and 6 of those appearances were subs. Edgar Castillo has started 20 games. And then you also have Jalil Anibaba. He has 19 appearances, and Tony De La Mea has 15. Mancien's not even in consideration, in my opinion, because he's been out so long. So really, in my mind, this is a two-way race between Andrew Farrell and Brandon Bai. We've talked about DeJuan Jones, and he certainly is, an incredible athlete, and he can recover very well. But, defensively, he still has some holes, and I don't think he's really Defender of the Year, because I just don't think defensively he's been good enough. Same with Edgar Castillo, 5 assists. He certainly has contributed offensively, but I think any Revs fan will tell you that defense is not his specialty. Brandon Bye, I think, has taken major strides defensively, but you look at Andrew Farrell, he played pretty solidly at right back. He moved to center back in the middle of the season and really has stepped up for this team at a position he struggled in 2015. He's been the best center back on this team this season. I don't see any argument outside of Andrew Farrell, and I think it's really well deserved. He's really been the only player on that back line that has been, I'll say, defensively stable. I don't know if that's a fair statement to make, but everyone else kind of has a major flaw. I don't think there's anything that Andrew Farrell has done, minus that NYCFC penalty he conceded. I don't really have any memories of Andrew Farrell being a huge liability to this back line, whereas pretty much everyone else you can kind of point to some spots throughout this season that was a bit shaky. So Andrew Farrell, I think, gets the nod, and I can't imagine he doesn't win. Sean, do you have any other final thoughts before we wrap up here? Sean, are you still there?
Sorry, I muted myself.
You sure did. I'm leaving it in. I'm leaving that in just so everyone knows that you screwed up here today.
I'm just trying to help you out with the editing, so you don't have to edit out the background noise when I'm not talking. I'm trying to do you a favor here. But I was just saying, I think it's going to be a fascinating final 2 weeks of the season, where the Revolution, are in a position where they're in a good position. They're in the 7th seed, but they're in a position where they have to get some points, or they're probably going to have to get some points to clinch a playoff spot. In one of 3 very difficult games that they have to finish out the season. We're unfortunately recording this episode before Portland plays their Sunday night game, so it's hard to say exactly what form they're going to go into Wednesday's game for. But regardless of kind of the disappointing results Portland's had lately at home, playing in Portland is one of the most difficult stadiums to play in. They have some, they're very loud fan base. I've been to that stadium. It's quite the experience if you ever have the opportunity to go. So it's going to be a difficult game for the Revolution, and just one home game left for the Revs. I'm excited to see how the rest of this season plays out for the Revolution. It's going to be a big test for the team, and hopefully something that they can use to build upon going into the next season, even if this season ends as a 7th seed and one and done in the playoffs.
And my final thoughts too also involve Portland. But the other Portland, because there was a news this week from the Portland Press Herald that says that there's a group that's interested in bringing a USL team to Portland, Maine, and I think that is the biggest no-brainer on earth. I've obviously have stood up for my home state of Maine, vacation land. I think they need a USL team. It's a great soccer market. I think it's very underrated. High school soccer is one of the bigger high school sports in the state. There's been some decent soccer talent that has come out of Maine, so hopefully they get a USL team, and they've supported the Sea Dogs. They have the Maine Red Claws, and they used to have the Portland Pirates. They now have an ECHL team. It's a great minor league city. Let's bring the USL to Portland. I'm fully on board for that, and I think too, with Hartford and a potential Revs 2 team, I wouldn't be shocked that if down the road we have a USL League One New England division or a Northeast division, which I think would be really, really great for the region. So hopefully things move well in that direction, and hopefully we get some USL soccer to Maine.
Yeah, and one other note, if you haven't seen Kai Kamara's goal over the weekend, you should check that out, because the former Rev scored quite the bicycle kick finish against Kansas City. So if you're a fan of good goals, make sure you check out ex-Rev Kai Kamara. The one thing I thought interesting there was he did do the game was in Kansas City, and he did do his heart-shaped hands celebration against his former team and against the fans that kind of embraced him and embraced that celebration more than any other. So I don't know what to make of that. But it was a fantastic strike and well worth a watch if you haven't seen it.
Is that part of the don't celebrate against your old team? Are you implying that it was a disrespectful to not do the celebration in front of his old fans? Or are you saying that it was a don't celebrate against your old team type?
I'm honestly just not sure what to make of that one, because it was, I think before the match he had posted some highlight where he was showing himself doing the same celebration, and all the Kansas City fans in the crowd were doing the celebration, and he was really embraced by Kansas City, and I think he really embraced Kansas City. So it was just more surprising to me. I don't think there was necessarily animosity there from Kai, because I think he had a good time in Kansas City, but I just found it odd more than anything, and I don't know if I don't like it or if I like it. It was just different.
Do you believe in not celebrating against your old team, or do you believe in rubbing it in? I'm a full rub it in guy.
I think it depends on the scenario in which you left. If you played for a team for 10 years and had a very good career there, and then kind of left on your own terms, then I don't think you should necessarily celebrate against your old team. If you left under harsh circumstances, then I'm fine with it. I know people were annoyed when I think Patrick Mullins first scored against the Revolution and he celebrated, but he left because the Revolution left him unprotected in the expansion draft, and that doesn't bother me. So I guess I take it on a case by case basis on whether or not I think you should celebrate against your old team.
Yeah, Kellen Rowe and Lee Wynn didn't score against the Revolution this year, so we're safe at discussing this. I'm sure we'd feel a little differently if they kind of went over their top with their celebrations. But for the most part, I have no issue with it whatsoever. Just don't celebrate when you're running the score up against Thailand. That's what I say. Sean, where can people find you on Twitter?
Yeah, you can follow me at Sean L. Donahue.
And you can follow us on Twitter at Revolution Recap, and also like the Revolution Recap page on Facebook. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. The Revs have 2 matches this week as they play their game in hand on the road in Portland on Wednesday night, as we've talked about. And they also return to Foxborough for their last home game of the season against New York City FC. We'll be back next week to break it all down, but until then, thank you all for listening, and go Revs.